I can't mimic voices for love or money. I'm completely hopeless at it. I was a really bad actor at school, and
For over 2 decades, the garage behind Clarence House stood untouched, locked tight with no explanation. Staff were forbidden to enter. Even King Charles, some say, never questioned it. But in nearly 2025, during routine renovations, workers stumbled upon a forgotten key, and what they found behind that rusted door would send shockwaves through the monarchy. Hidden letters, secret recordings, a vintage car tied to a royal scandal. And at the center of it all, Queen Camilla. This isn't just a garage, it's a vault of betrayal, silence, and power. Stay with us, because what lies behind that door changes everything you thought you knew. The Whisper at Clarence House. It began, as so many royal secrets do, with a whisper, the kind of whisper that slips through corridors lined with portraits of silent monarchs, a low murmur that clings to marble and tapestries, hinting at things better left undisturbed. In early spring of 2024, a young palace footman, new to Clarence House and unaware of what not to overhear, paused at the wrong moment near the Queen Consort's private study. Inside, Queen Camilla's voice was sharp and hushed. "No one opens it, not without me, ever." The reply was quieter, a man's voice. Even with the renovations, there was a pause, then a single word, brittle with finality, especially. At first, the footman said nothing. He chalked it up to another royal oddity, something beyond his pay grade and certainly not worth risking a job over. But the words sat with him, that one word especially. What could possibly be in a garage that required such secrecy, such possessiveness? Clarence House was old, sprawling, and full of stories, but most of its spaces, save for the Queen's garage tucked away near the rear gardens, were regularly maintained. Staff came and went, deliveries moved through, but the garage, it remained locked, lights off, dust is thick. Not even the head butler had the key. Whispers turned into quiet conversations among the housekeepers. Some claimed the garage hadn't been opened since the early 2000s. Others said it had been sealed long before that, before Charles and Camilla were ever married. One former cleaner mentioned a time years ago when a delivery van accidentally backed too close to the garage doors. Camilla reportedly emerged within minutes, livid, insisting the driver never return. Another attendant recalled how, during a royal open house, the garage door had been discreetly draped with a decorative covering, camouflaged against the rest of the estate. No one questioned it, not then, but behind closed doors, those closest to the royal household knew the difference between privacy and paranoia. What Queen Camilla had with that garage was not ordinary caution. It was something else, something deeper, and it had gone unquestioned for far too long. By the time the renovations were scheduled for 2025, Clarence House had grown quieter. King Charles had taken ill and begun spending more time at Balmoral. Camilla had become more withdrawn, her public appearances less frequent. She often requested solitude, sometimes disappearing for hours into her study, her personal wing, or that forbidden stretch near the back gardens. The renovation team, brought in for structural work, had no knowledge of the garage's peculiar history. They were given blueprints, schedules, access points, but when one of them casually asked about the locked unit in the rear, just a routine check for electrical wiring, they were met with a strange silence. A supervisor stepped in and murmured, "You'll skip that one. Orders from above." The whisper had returned, this time louder. This time it is impossible to ignore. What was Queen Camilla hiding in that garage, and why had it remained untouched, unseen, and unspoken for more than 20 years? Something was coming, and once the door opened, nothing would be the same. A lock older than the marriage. The whisper grew into a question that no one wanted to answer. As the renovation crews worked around Clarence House, skirting the garage as instructed, unease began to settle like dust in the corners. It wasn't just that the garage was locked, it was the way it was locked: solid brass, industrial, not standard issue for a royal residence, the kind of lock meant to keep people out for good. When one of the electricians passed it on his way to the side panel, he noticed something strange. The mechanism, though worn by time, bore a dated hallmark, 1996, a year before Diana died, nearly a decade before Charles and Camilla's marriage, older than the title Queen Consort, older than the public reconciliation. The lock had been there before the wedding, before the apology tour, before the nation was asked to forgive. It was a detail that refused to be ignored. Why install such a serious lock before anyone knew Camilla would one day hold a crown? Unless, of course, the contents it protected had nothing to do with being queen and everything to do with being something else entirely. Something hidden, something personal. The rumors that had always dogged the royal pair began to take new shape. The old stories of whispered phone calls, late-night visits, the infamous tapes, suddenly, they didn't seem so far away. Not when the lock itself testified to a plan years in the making. Not when it was clear that whoever installed it wasn't trying to protect Camilla. They were protecting what Camilla was trying to forget. In private, senior palace aides began to murmur. One remembered a time long ago when Diana's belongings were removed from various properties. Most were sent to storage or returned to Althorpe, but a few things were said to have gone missing. Small things, boxes, letters, a piece of jewelry never accounted for. The mention of it was quickly buried, brushed aside by the crown's meticulous handlers. But what if they hadn't been lost? What if they had been taken hidden in plain sight, just behind that heavy garage door? By now, even the staff who had remained loyal for decades couldn't explain it away. Clarence House had seen many changes since Diana's demise. It had been redecorated, expanded, softened, but that garage had remained frozen, untouched, unquestioned. Even when new vehicles were brought in, even when space was needed, no one dared suggest it be opened. Queen Camilla, they said, reacted with veiled fury at the very mention of the space. Once, a gardener accidentally left his tools too close to the entrance. He didn't return the next season. And then came the catalyst, a request from the engineering team. They needed access to a side wall of the garage to inspect moisture damage. The project manager submitted a formal inquiry. What they received wasn't a denial. It was silent. No response, no signature, just silence, as if the space itself didn't exist, as if acknowledging it would undo something carefully buried. But silence, like locks, has its limits, and soon the key would be found. The accidental discovery silence can only stretch so far before something breaks. And in the case of Clarence House, it broke with a click. It was late afternoon, the kind of quiet London day where the clouds seemed to press against the roof, heavy and unmoving. The engineering team had paused their work, waiting on further instructions. The garage, still sealed like a tomb, loomed just beyond the hedges. No one touched it. No one dared. But inside the east wing of the house, in a forgotten utility hallway lined with dusty portraits, a painter removing frames for refurbishment stumbled on something peculiar. Behind one of the gilt-edged frames, hidden in a hollowed-out section of the wall, was a small leather pouch, old, worn. It fell with a soft thud when the frame was dislodged. Curious and unaware of what he'd just unearthed, the painter opened the pouch and found two brass keys, both engraved with the initials C.S. Camilla Shand, her maiden name. One was clearly a front door spare, but the other was unlike any standard-issue key. He turned it over in his hand and noticed the hallmark, the same as the garage lock, 1996. The keys were turned over to the site foreman, who paused. He had heard the stories. Everyone had. He didn't say a word to the painter. Instead, he slipped the odd key into his back pocket and waited until the shift ended. That night, curiosity swallowed protocol. With Charles away in and Camilla at a charity dinner in Bath, the house was nearly empty. Only a skeleton staff remained. The foreman approached the garage in the dark, flashlight in one hand, key in the other. The lock was stiff, corroded around the edges, but the key fit. With the groan of old hinges and a sudden cold draft, the door cracked open for the first time in nearly 30 years. What lay inside was not what he expected. It wasn't a garage in the traditional sense, no parked car, no clutter of royal gardening tools. Instead, the space had been divided, clearly, intentionally. A false wall had been erected, painted to match the aged plaster, nearly invisible unless you looked for it. Beyond that, a chamber, temperature-controlled, air filtered, silent. The room was lined with trunks, cabinets, and sealed wooden boxes. Not labeled, not cataloged, just waiting. He didn't dare enter. He backed out, locked the door again, and reported what he found to the renovation director the next morning. By then, the key had become more than a key. It was a weapon, a wedge, a path into a secret that had been carefully wrapped in silence, not just for years, but for entire royal generations. The directive came fast. Don't say a word. Don't leak anything. But by then, the house had already begun to stir, because secrets, like rooms behind false walls, can only stay buried for so long. The lock had turned, the whisper had become a voice, and the past was no longer content to sleep. The hidden chamber. Within, words spread like breath on cold glass, slowly at first, then fogging everything. The renovation director tried to contain it, but curiosity is a force stronger than loyalty, and Clarence House had too many corners, too many ears. A private security detail was called in, and by the time they returned to the garage 2 days later, the atmosphere had shifted. What was once just a room behind a locked door now felt like a vault of consequence. The key was produced again. The lock clicked. This time they stepped inside. The air inside was cold, unnaturally so. A chill not born of weather, but preservation. The space had been altered over time, no doubt about it. The original garage walls were still there in parts, but someone had gone to great lengths to conceal them. Thick drywall, soundproof padding, and insulation lined the structure. At the far end, the false wall waited like a mask. One guard approached it and tapped lightly, hollow. Another pressed along the edges until he found a panel that gave way with pressure. The wall shuddered open. Behind it was the chamber. Lights flickered on automatically, revealing a room that could have belonged in a private museum. Shelves of wooden trunks stood like sentinels along the walls. Filing cabinets, locked tight, bore royal crests. A glass display case hummed quietly in the corner. It was refrigerated. Inside sat a delicate tiara, but not one seen in official portraits. Its design was older, untouched by public history. No placard, no context, just memory suspended in glass. Boxes were marked only with numbers, no names, no labels. Yet every corner of the room hummed with weight. Time had been trapped here. Decades, maybe more. Dust-free, controlled, forgotten on purpose. A single steamer trunk sat in the center of the room. Unlike the others, it was worn, its leather cracked. Tied to it with a faded ribbon was a tag. No date, no code, just 2 letters, DS. They didn't open anything that day. Instead, a decision was made. A report would be sent, not to the public, but directly to royal oversight. Quiet channels, no press, no leaks, but someone had already broken the unspoken rule. A member of the cleanup team had taken a photo on their phone of a wide shot of the chamber, with the trunk in the center and the strange glass case to the right. That photo would later find its way into the hands of a freelance reporter, and the moment it did, the story began to unravel. Because this wasn't just about a garage anymore. It was about what the crown had chosen to forget, what Camilla had chosen to bury, and what Diana, whose initials still echoed from that faded tag, might have left behind not for the public, but for someone to find when the time was right. That time had come. The chamber was no longer hidden. The vault had been breached, and the silence that had once been so carefully guarded was beginning to scream. Diana's letters and something worse. The breach had been quiet, but its consequences were thunderous. Once the image of the hidden chamber leaked, Clarence House scrambled. The media hadn't caught on yet, but the palace's internal chain of command ignited like dry tinder. A royal historian was summoned discreetly to examine the artifacts. His instructions were clear: catalog, assess, report. But when he opened the steamer trunk marked DS, all composure drained from the room. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Some are handwritten, some typed but annotated in Diana's unmistakable cursive, elegant, looping, deeply personal. They weren't diary entries or drafts of speeches. These were letters never sent, or perhaps sent and returned, each one addressed to Charles, to William, to Harry, even to Camilla. The air turned electric as the historian read through the first few. There was pain, yes, there was heartbreak and betrayal, but threaded through every line was something more dangerous. Diana wrote in detail about her suspicions, the manipulation she sensed around her, the deliberate isolations, the broken promises that had been made in private but never honored in public. She spoke of a plan to leave, not just the marriage, but the institution altogether, and she hinted at something that no one in that chamber wanted to admit had ever existed: a warning. Not vague, not emotional, but calculated, targeted, specific. Tucked between the letters was a sealed envelope marked, "For William, when he's ready." The flap had never been broken. Its edges were frayed with time, but the seal held firm. The historian didn't dare open it. That choice, he said, belonged to the one it was meant for. But beside the envelope lay something else, a folder, slim, unlabeled. It contained what appeared to be communication logs, faxed memos, emails printed out and preserved, many of them from the mid-90s. A few bore letterheads from tabloids, others were addressed from inside government offices. One was a contract, a non-disclosure agreement. The name at the bottom wasn't Diana's, it was Camilla's. The date on the contract was August 15, 1997, 2 weeks before Diana's death. That detail alone was enough to send the historian into silence. Why would Camilla be involved in any tabloid dealings during that time? And why would she want those documents buried behind a false wall? There was more. A cassette tape sat at the bottom of the trunk. Its label faded, but one word remained legible: call. An old answering machine tape by the look of it. The device needed to play it was found in one of the nearby cabinets. They didn't play it that day. No one wanted to hear what it might say yet, because at that moment they understood something chilling. This wasn't just Diana's voice preserved, it was a blueprint of her fear, a map of the silence she'd endured, and perhaps a clue to the silence that followed her into that Paris tunnel. The room had given up one of its secrets, but it wasn't done speaking. Not yet. The phone recordings. They waited 2 more days before playing the tape, long enough for senior palace aides to deliberate behind locked doors, long enough for legal advisors to draw up silence agreements, but not long enough to erase the tension that had sunk its claws into every corridor of Clarence House. The tape was brought to a private listening room, sealed and guarded. Only 3 people were present: the royal historian, a palace legal advisor, and a representative from archival security. The machine clicked as it swallowed the cassette. Then came the hiss, then the voice. It was unmistakably Camilla, younger, sharper, laced with an urgency that didn't belong in polite conversation. The first recording seemed harmless enough, a voicemail left for an unnamed contact. She spoke quickly, referencing a packet that needed to be collected before it leaks. But it was the second message that drew blood. The tone was different. It had been recorded in real time, a captured phone call between Camilla and an advisor whose name was redacted from the attached notes. She spoke about Diana, not kindly, not cautiously. She mentioned a strategy to reclaim the public narrative. She referenced press editors by first name. And then, clear as crystal through the static, she said, "If she keeps pushing this interview angle, we will release the August plan. That should stop her." The room fell silent. Replaying the phrase didn't soften the blow. If anything, it made it worse. There had always been rumors of media manipulation, whispers of backdoor arrangements, silent trades between the royals and the press. But this wasn't speculation. This was evidence. Camilla, not yet queen, was orchestrating a plan behind Diana's back. And if the date of the tape was accurate, August 10th, 1997, it would mean the August plan was discussed less than a month before Diana's fatal crash. The third recording was shorter, a conversation between Camilla and someone referred to only as the cleaner. She asked if the items from the old flat had been moved. The reply was muffled, but Camilla's answer was not. "Put them in the garage. No one goes in there anymore." Then the click of the phone ended. That was it. No context, no names. But paired with what had already been uncovered, the meaning became disturbingly clear. The historian leaned back in his chair, eyes hollow. The legal advisor stared ahead, unmoving. What they had just heard was not only damaging, it was explosive. It didn't prove intent. It didn't link Camilla to anything beyond media manipulation. But it raised questions that no one was prepared to answer. Why had she kept these recordings? Why store them in a place she swore no one would enter? And if this was just one tape, how many others existed? The cassette stopped spinning, but the consequences were already in motion. The ghosts sealed inside that garage had begun to stir, and now that their voices had returned, there would be no silencing them. Not this time. The hidden car. By the time they finished listening to the last recording, the silence inside Clarence House was no longer sacred. It was oppressive, a suffocating kind of quiet that suggested everyone knew something unspoken had just cracked open. But it was not over. There was still one part of the garage left unexplored. In the initial sweep, it had been ignored by a covered object in the farthest corner, draped in layers of thick canvas tarpaulin and wedged behind a stack of empty crates. It hadn't drawn much attention at first, but now, with the recordings echoing in their minds and Diana's letters still lying quietly in the trunk, every overlooked shadow felt loaded. When they pulled back the cover, the dust bloomed like ash. Beneath it sat a vintage Jaguar XJS, deep green, long out of production. The tires had flattened from time and neglect, and the windshield bore the grime of decades. A matching leather interior peeked out from behind cracked glass. The number plate had been deliberately removed. The ignition key, however, was still in place. The car wasn't listed in the Royal Vehicle Inventory, no official record, no history of service. It was as if it had never existed. Inside the glove compartment, they found a burner phone, the kind used for calls that aren't meant to be traced. Its battery was long dead, but beside it was something far stranger, a folded map, Paris. The date scribbled in pencil across the bottom corner read August 25th, 1997. The lines traced a route from the Ritz through the Alma Tunnel, ending at a circled point near a nondescript alleyway, several blocks from the Pont de l'Alma crash site. Nothing about it made sense, not on its own. But nothing in that garage stood on its own anymore. They checked the car's VIN. It was traced back to a man with intelligence ties, an MI6 field coordinator who had disappeared from public records in the early 2000s. No death certificate, no retirement, just silence. The name was redacted in the internal summary forwarded to the palace, but one chilling note remained. Vehicle decommissioned for private surveillance use. Why would Queen Camilla, before her coronation, have a surveillance car hidden in her garage? Why keep it behind a false wall, alongside recordings, letters, and sealed contracts? Theories began to swirl, dark and disorienting. Was it used to follow Diana, to monitor her? Was it part of the August plan mentioned in the tape? There were no answers, only implications. The car was removed under a white sheet at midnight. No cameras, no announcement. It was taken not to a royal garage, but to a secured government site outside London. Whatever it was meant to expose or protect, it now belonged to a higher authority. But the image remained, that abandoned Jaguar, crouched in silence, carrying secrets no engine should hold, as if it too had been waiting, watching, listening, and now it was ready to speak. Palace in panic. The car's removal was meant to be quiet, a surgical extraction beneath the cover of night. But Clarence House does not breathe in isolation. It lives under constant watch by insiders, press liaisons, and those who know the scent of scandal before it hits the air. By dawn, whispers had already begun, not among the tabloids yet, but in more dangerous places behind closed government doors, within elite press circles, across encrypted message threads where royal secrets often find their first crack. Something had been taken from the Queen's private garage, something heavy, something historic. And within 24 hours, Camilla knew. They said she returned early from Bath unannounced, face pale beneath her usual composure. The moment she stepped into Clarence House, the air changed. No smile, no greeting, just a sharp question delivered to her chief of staff. "Where is it?" He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. Her eyes scanned the hallway like a hawk circling prey. Within minutes, she had locked herself in her private quarters. No meetings, no calls. The staff were instructed to avoid the West Wing entirely. What followed was chaos masked in protocol. A royal emergency meeting was called at an off-site location. Lawyers were summoned. Communications officers drafted responses they never sent. Meanwhile, word of the garage's contents had begun to stretch its fingers into the hands of journalists too clever to be ignored. A royal biographer received an anonymous tip. A former royal driver, long retired, got a visit from someone asking questions about a green Jaguar that was never logged. It was like watching a dam begin to splinter, pressure building behind centuries of stone. Inside the palace, even the most seasoned advisors looked shaken, not because of what had been found, but because of what might still be hiding. If one garage could hold that many letters from Diana, secret recordings, surveillance vehicles, what else had been buried? What else had been sealed? Not just by Camilla, but by the institution built to protect her. Charles, still at Balmoral, was said to be furious, not at his wife, not entirely, but at the timing, the exposure, the sheer impossibility of containing what was now leaking into the bloodstream of the nation. He ordered a private briefing, not with aides but with his sons. But by then it was too late. William already knew. Someone had sent him the photo, the trunk, the tag, the initials, DS. Outside the gates, the media hadn't yet exploded, but the temperature was rising. Camilla, once hailed for her quiet rehabilitation, was now a question mark wrapped in protocol and pearl earrings. The garage she had kept locked for decades was now open, its secrets bleeding into daylight. And the royal family, so used to managing shadows, was about to learn what happens when the past is no longer content to stay hidden. The storm had arrived, and the crown was no longer the one holding the umbrella. The public reckoning. It took less than 72 hours for the silence to shatter. A single headline cracked the veneer, first tame, vague, speculative. Unusual discovery at Clarence House raises questions, but it was enough to trigger the chain reaction, enough for every newsroom in London to ignite. By morning, photographs of the sealed trunk with the faded tag marked DS appeared online. The image was grainy, but the initials were clear. Diana's ghost had stepped into the spotlight once more, and this time, she was not alone. Camilla did not appear publicly for 5 days. In that absence, the world turned. Commentators dissected every letter, every tape, every uncovered item from that hidden garage. Former palace staff, once silenced by contracts and fear, began to speak, one by one. Carefully at first, then louder. Stories of strange deliveries, backdated schedules, missing files. No one could prove anything directly, not yet, but the questions were no longer whispers. They were demands. William, stone-faced and silent, refused to comment, but his movements told another story. He cancelled 2 royal engagements. He was seen arriving at Kensington Palace well past midnight. Reports swirled that he had personally reviewed the envelope, marked for him the one Diana left behind, untouched until now. No one knew what it said, but whatever it contained, it changed something. That much was clear in the set of his jaw the next day. Public trust faltered. Online forums erupted. Hashtags calling for transparency flooded the digital space. And beneath it all, an ache resurfaced, the old wound of Diana's death. The suspicion, the unresolved ache that the truth had always been edited. Now it felt as though the missing chapters had finally surfaced, not from a tell-all book or dramatized series, but from a garage Camilla had locked with her own hands. The monarchy tried to steady itself. An official statement was released, carefully worded and distant. It spoke of unverified materials, of historic items under internal review, but the tone was flat, lifeless. It answered nothing, and the silence behind it was deafening. Camilla, when she finally appeared, looked composed, but behind her eyes the storm still swirled. She gave no speech, she offered no clarification, just a brief appearance at a royal garden event, standing among roses, her hands gloved, her smile tight. But the world was no longer looking at the flowers. They were looking at the woman who had kept a museum of secrets behind a locked garage door, and wondering why. The final image of that week came not from Clarence House or Buckingham Palace, but from a private schoolyard, a moment caught by a passing parent. Prince George, quiet and serious, standing beside Princess Charlotte as she shielded a folder clutched to his chest. It bore a sketch of a crown, and above it, the initials of a grandmother he never truly knew, DS. The garage had been opened, but the story was far from over. Something else had been set in motion, and now the past is rewriting the future. The door to Queen Camilla's garage may be closed once more, but what it unleashed cannot be locked away again. Letters, recordings, a hidden car, fragments of a story buried in silence now echoing through the monarchy's walls. As the world watches and waits, one truth remains clear. Some secrets were never meant to stay hidden. What comes next may reshape everything. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned, because this royal reckoning has only just begun. The past is speaking. Are they ready to listen?